I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome back to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
We apologize for the slight little delay in between all of the games. We know that the Mavericks have got off to the regular season start, obviously, but we actually went to both of the games, and amidst a lot of travel and some other things, it was a little bit difficult for us to find a time to record, but shouldn't have really any issues with that, even in the live games that we go to going forward. So nonetheless, we've still been getting content for you guys out on the Smoking Cuban. So make sure you guys stay tuned to that. But obviously, the hot topic of discussion today is going to be the Mavericks' last two games and how they started the season here, and all the sort of narratives that we can pull from the games that we've watched. Of course, the Mavericks beat the San Antonio Spurs and Victor Wembanyama 126-119 the other day, Wednesday night, October 25th. And then just last night, Friday night, we're recording this on Saturday, the following day, the Mavericks in their season opener at home beat the Brooklyn Nets 125-120 beyond some historic, sort of heroics there at the end by Luka Doncic within the last 3 minutes and 22 seconds of the game. There's a lot to unravel here. It's going to be definitely a longer episode because Jaren and I definitely want to give you guys the due diligence of covering everything holistically that we missed. But before we go ahead and head into the ad break, Jaren, do you have anything else?
Not really. I mean, I feel like through the first two games, the Mavericks have looked good. They're one of five teams that are 2-0, undefeated in the NBA currently, where the Orlando Magic currently stand. So take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, they've looked pretty solid through two games. I don't really know what all to take. In anything negative wise, I'm not gonna but yeah, I think there's definitely changes to be made. The Mavericks are looming on a 3-day break before they play the Memphis Grizzlies on Monday. And I think that there's going to be a lot of changes within the rotation and maybe with some guys' decision making within those 3 days. Just a lot of film session will be needed. But yeah, outside of that, they look pretty solid.
Yeah, well, it is 3 days technically in between games, but it is only 2 days off. So the Mavericks are set to face off against the Grizzlies 7 p.m. on Monday night. They had practice this morning. Seemed like it was a pretty solid shoot around. There's some media coverage there, and Jason Kidd had a post practice media availability. I haven't looked at all the quotes from that. I know a few players spoke as well, but if we see any of those pop up, we will talk about those as well. But before we get into everything, here's an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So getting straight to it, we were at the Frost Breaks. Oh my God, I'm mispronouncing their name because obviously we did not take a liking to how small the personal pan-sized pizzas were at the Frostbank Center. But
Yes,
at the Frostbank Center in San Antonio, we were there Wednesday night when the Mavericks beat Victor Wembanyama in his NBA regular season debut. It was an eclectic scene, very, very fun festivities besides the parking situation at the end and trying to get out of the stadium. But we were able to manage, and we're here back for you guys today. So, Jaren, from the top, this was obviously a very high-profile game. I mean, we can just speak to the energy in the arena every time that Wembanyama made a shot. But, on the other side of things, it was also, of course, the Mavericks, regular season debut. So, there's a lot of anticipation, boiling up on both sides, obviously. And, we were excited as ever to see the Mavericks for the first time since April. And, off the gate, San Antonio seemed like they just couldn't miss. And our offense was stagnating a little, but things ended up coming into fruition throughout the course of the game. And, that's kind of what happened in the Brooklyn game to an extent a little bit. But, that Spurs game was definitely, a lot more of a team win. Just right off the bat, when from that first quarter, what we were sort of takeaways after, the Spurs got off to that hot start.
Yeah, I think pretty much right away you could feel the Wemby effect within that game, at least through the first 6 or 8 minutes whenever he was playing his first quarter stint. He had that block where he came across the weak side, had that block on Kyrie Irving like really early in the game. I think it was only like a minute, maybe even just seconds into the game. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, had that block, and that pretty much, in a sense, that kind of like made the Mavericks bench just like fear Wembanyama even more for like that 6 to 8 minute stretch. Like I said, nobody was penetrating inside. Nobody was even getting any good outside shots. It was all just kind of scramble offense. Nobody could get any sets going. Not that the Spurs defense necessarily looked great. It was just the Wembanyama effect was quite literally being felt. And I'm not going to lie. I don't know about you, Will. I was, a little worried, not for the Mavericks' sake, but just for the NBA's sake. If, his first game in, he was having that much of a draw already. But, as the game progressed, definitely things they sort of calmed down. And I really think Derek Jones Jr. was kind of the guy that got involved. He was the first guy to really drive over Wembanyama. Not that he scored or anything, but he got fouled twice, I believe it was. And then Wembanyama started getting in foul troubles with all his offensive fouls. But yeah, after that first quarter, I would say things started to really start going. The Spurs looked really good. I'm not trying to take any credit from them. I think the Mavericks just played better down the stretch. That second half really hurt the Spurs. But yeah, in that first quarter, I can't even lie. The San Antonio Spurs looked really impressive on the defensive end. Partially because of Wembanyama himself, but also just, they were making shots. Devin Vassell was going off. Keldon Johnson was having his presence felt. Even Jeremy Sohan was like, making threes here and there. I was very surprised with that. I didn't think that he had that in his arsenal, but, I guess he's been working on it in the offseason. But yeah, that team, they looked really impressive through the first quarter. Of course, the Mavericks started to come back a little bit, and I think that they were only down by like 5 or 4 at halftime. I'm not quite sure what the halftime score was, but I do know that we allowed 40 points in that first quarter. So definitely the defense was a little lackluster, to say the least. But in that second half, I know that we picked it up. But yeah, I mean, just going into halftime, I would say the Mavericks started to look a lot better. They started to get the ball moving. Offensive sets were looking really good. I don't know if you want to touch up on that second quarter at all, Will, but I think that it was a complete flip around from that first quarter.
No, yeah, definitely. I thought that the Mavericks really started to hone in on their offense, in that second quarter. That's when, that sort of flare out game, at the pick and pop between, Luka and Kyrie and, Grant Williams started coming to fruition. He started knocking down a couple threes that really, I think, gave Dallas some momentum down the stretch in that half. I thought Derek Lively, obviously, all throughout the game, was making his presence felt, but specifically in that second quarter, you really saw how effective he was as a rim deterrent. And just to kind of go back, not to really get off topic, but what you were talking about with Wembanyama, we talked about a lot about how the Spurs were going to use him in the pregame, and Jaren was very adamant that they were going to try to start Zach Collins at the 5 and use, Wembanyama in this sort of freelancer-esque role, maybe hide him on like one of the less dynamic sort of offensive players on the Mavericks, like Grant Williams or Derek Jones Jr., and then kind of just let him help wherever and, be a, sort of stopgap for any sort of dribble penetration that, otherwise somebody on that weak side corner really couldn't come get to. And, he did just that. And, obviously the foul trouble was there. It was his first game. The Spurs are obviously very, operating really gingerly with his minutes. And, on the defense, the offensive side of things rather, they definitely have a lot more actions that they can unlock with him. I liked how they use him, initiating from the perimeter so much, but I also thought that, they got to get him going downhill, stuff like that, because he was shooting a lot. So that's going to be really intriguing, just to talk about how, his career going forward and things of that nature. But, to resurface, back to the Mavericks in that second quarter, I thought Luka Doncic did a great job of putting more pressure on the rim, especially, throughout those sort of periods, where offense was starting to get kind of stagnant. He was really able to kind of just get to that in between game, either just use his pure strength and sort of just stop on a dime, a couple feet away and just flip up that little like push shot or floater. He did that for a couple and ones, and I thought that definitely gave the Mavericks momentum, as well as Derek Lively's interior presence and how much of a mass effect that was when the Spurs wings were driving downhill. He did just a great job of being that help side defense. And I thought he did a pretty good job on Zach Collins too, even though he had some tough buckets on him. We know when he was matched up one-on-one down with him on that dunker spot. But the Mavericks did come out shooting the ball pretty hot in that first quarter. The Spurs honestly almost just got hotter. I remember us talking in the stands like, wow, they just can't miss. But a lot of it was attributed to some of those missed rotations on the wing, stuff like that for the Mavericks. When they were playing defense, there were a couple instances where guys were kind of just sagging off of shooters, maybe not even giving them the respect that they deserved. And Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, they were making some tough mid-range jump shots, some tough pull-up threes. And I think that really started to open up their dribble drive game for them. And I honestly do think that, in that first half, the Spurs did a good job of controlling the pace of play compared to the Mavericks. And, on long misses, they were doing a better job of getting out in transition, stuff like that. So overall, the Mavericks played a much more stout defensive second half. They clamped down on a lot of the, I thought the rim penetration that was just killing them because, once the Spurs got off to a hot shooting start, the Mavericks just started conceding a lot of single dribble blow-bys, things of that nature. It almost looked like they were, just too scared to contest in that second half to an extent sometimes, but ended up paying dividends because San Antonio was not able to shoot near as well. So that's kind of my sort of wrap up for how that first half came to a close. Both in the Brooklyn game and the Spurs game, Kyrie definitely had a really, really slow first half and kind of got it turning around in the second half, but probably a little bit more so in the San Antonio game. But, to open up that third quarter, Jaren, in the second half at large, just talk about how much more locked in the Mavericks were from a defensive standpoint, just like a scheme standpoint. It seemed like there were a lot more charges being taken. The sort of connectivity of the rotations was just a lot more synchronized than it was in that first half.
Yeah, I guess just kind of touch upon the charges. I think that in the Brooklyn game they had 4, and the San Antonio game I want to say that they had 2. Just cutting off passing lanes, cutting off driving lanes, getting to those sort of guys going downhill, or the guys coming off screens, or anything like that. The Mavericks did a really good job in both these games of getting down there and kind of aiding in that sort of help side defense. But yeah, in terms of that second half of the Spurs game, I think that the Mavericks did a really good job of playing, just not necessarily off-ball defense on Wembanyama, but really good ball denial in general. In large part that was Grant Williams. I think Jason Kidd made the correct adjustment to put Grant Williams on Wembanyama. I'm not quite sure if that was the main assessment in the first half, like if Williams was playing on Wembanyama.
I think they were kind of just showing him a different. My recollection in the first half, they were showing him like a variety of different looks. I remember, Derrick Jones Jr. got matched up.
Yeah, he started out with him. Yeah,
they were just throwing, sort of the kitchen sink of wings and big men at him. But I mean, we've seen throughout these first 2 games that the Mavericks are switching a lot more in defense, and that's something we'll get more to in the Brooklyn game for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, just pretty much anytime that Wembanyama was in the game, Grant Williams was in the game. He was sort of his main defender. There was only one really bad possession that I saw out of Grant Williams. He still got to him. They set like a I don't quite know, but it was off the low block. They set a screen, and they got Grant Williams just kind of being slow. Wembanyama got the shot, had like a mid-range shot, and it was fairly easy for him. That was in the fourth quarter. But outside of that, I thought Grant Williams played excellent defense against Wembanyama. Really good ball denial, kept him out of the paint at large. Other than that 1-and-1 that he had whenever Maxey allowed him in on like that transition, like that was really about it as far as Wembanyama going to the rim. He had an alley-oop, but outside of that, like I said, like there's really nothing that I can really gripe about. But yeah, Grant Williams played amazing defense. And as just far as the defense as a team, like there's a lot of adjustments. I thought Luka Doncic was playing really good defense. I was very surprised. I don't expect this to be something that, sticks throughout the whole entire season because again, we're only 2 games in. Once we hit that January, December stretch, I think that things might be slowing down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I've been very, very surprised with Luka's defense through 2 games. But definitely noticeable in that San Antonio game. I thought the team was just, like you said, to your point, just playing really switchable defense outside of, Grant Williams' assignment on Wembanyama. But as far as the offensive side of it goes in the second half, I thought the Mavericks did a really good job of keeping the game simple. Wembanyama has the effect where he can have 1 foot in the paint and 1 foot outside the paint, and he can get out to a perimeter shooter within 1 step. Like that's just how long and lengthy that guy is. I thought the Mavericks did a really good job of sort of drawing him to the strong side and then kicking it right out to the weak side and having someone drive, whether it was Tim Hardaway Jr., Kyrie Irving, whoever it was. The Mavericks did a really good job of, kind of getting to the weak side and then penetrating, which pretty much took Wembanyama out of the play entirely. And I thought, just keeping it that simple was really the bread and butter for the Mavericks and why they got the win in the first place. But yeah, I know that Luka, the perimeter shooting started to get going too. Grant Williams had a few threes here and there. Luka, of course, had his handful of threes. I'm trying to think of any other shoot. Tim Hardaway Jr., he went off in that San Antonio game.
No,
But
he
yeah,
actually did. He had a better game in the Brooklyn game, but
well, I don't know about a better game, but he had a better
really,
better points scored in the Brooklyn game, I would say.
yes,
But yeah, to my point, I think that the perimeter shooter started to get going for the Mavericks. And like I said, I thought they made the correct adjustment out of halftime as far as offense goes and just keeping it simple, getting Wembanyama to the strong side or weak side, whatever it was, and then, sort of drawing him or going to the other side and pretty much driving from there. And I think that's really what the Mavericks did from there on out and getting in transition. That team, I mean, I think that they had 115 possessions per 100 or however that stat is counted, which, that might even be that might be more than they had entirely last year. They were getting out in transition. They were scoring really quickly. The sets, they weren't taking 20 seconds to go. It was all under like 14 seconds, 15 seconds here and there. Like, the offense looked really, really smooth. Josh Green started getting things going. I was very surprised. I thought the Mavericks looked amazing. I know we'll talk about Derek Lively and his emergence in that second half. But I mean, things looked super crisp in that second half offensively. And like I said, just keeping it simple, I think is why the Mavericks won the game.
yeah, no, and I really like the point you brought up of how the Mavericks were, really trying to dictate the, where Wembanyama was on the court, and with Luka and Kyrie for that matter, with their ability to make some of those cross court passes, use the drag dribble out of double teams, that definitely can open up those driving lanes for guys like Josh Green. I mean, even Tim Hardaway Jr., even Grant Williams, and he's had a couple times so far where he's attacked off a closeout. He had and one in that San Antonio game, and then last night versus Brooklyn, he attacked off a closeout, stopped on a dime, pulled up for a little mid-range shot. So there's a little bit more dynamism that we're seeing from that wing position, thus far compared to last year. Obviously, I don't think all of those guys, between Derek Jones Jr., Grant Williams, and Josh Green, through 2 games, maybe besides Grant because he had a really good first game, but through 2 games, I know specifically in, Derek Jones Jr. in his case and Josh last night, I know that they obviously, need to showcase that dynamism a little bit more, because right now it does, seem very top heavy in terms of where the offense is being delegated. And, with Luka and Kyrie, initiating every time, that's, completely okay if both of them are, going off, at the same time. Then, at that point, the offense should just essentially revolve around them, because, that's, 2 guys at both ends of a fidget spinner that, I guess a fidget spinner actually has 3 sides. I'm stupid. But that's pretend
You
Mark
could say a
Cuban.
seesaw. or
Yeah,
something.
Mark Cuban's on the other side of the
Yeah, there you go.
fidget
There
spinner.
you go.
And they're all three just going off and just spinning around essentially. Just kicking it. But, when you add another piece of that equation, like, Josh Green, and you try to also divvy out his shot distribution, between those guys, is kind of, interesting how it's going to add up over the course of an 82 game season. And, for him to take that next step, Josh Green has to be the guy. And this sounds, very like a very complex ask, I guess, from him, but he has to be the guy, because Luka and Kyrie, yes, as great as they are, they're not going to be 100% every night, giving you, the full smorgasbord. I mean, maybe Luka at this going rate, it might be his MVP season, but Kyrie's going to have his games where he goes off for, like 45, but he may have some games where he has like 20 or so. And, if Josh Green can be the guy that steps up, when, one of Luka or Kyrie is having somewhat of a down game, and, if he can supplement, the offense coming from there, obviously him along with Tim as well. And, Tim's done a decent job of that thus far. That's obviously going to be big going forward. And right now, I'm more so, I guess, just talking about from an initiation standpoint, Luka and Kyrie are basically doing everything. They're, if, Tim or Josh have scored, it's typically, Tim has had a few, definitely had some, dribble handoffs ran for him and stuff like that, to where he's been able to, sort of make a play for himself at the top of the key, but it's mainly just, shoot if the guy goes under on the screen, or pass it off. And, with Josh, I would just like to see him be a little bit more aggressive in one-on-one scenarios. But I mean, yeah, had Kyrie been on during that game, we're not even probably having this discussion, right? At that point, I think Luka and Kyrie alone, just based on how Luka played in that San Antonio game, would have been enough to, put the game away a lot more decisively than it was.
Yeah, no, I most definitely agree. I think there's going to be a lot of weight on Josh Green. Maybe not a lot of weight necessarily, but a lot of, potential weight that's going to be on Josh Green's and potentially Tim Hardaway Jr.'s shoulders. If, necessarily one of those guys isn't getting it going, or like you said, if one of them are out, hurt, injury, whatever it is, it's going to be their job to sort of pick up on that, whether it's playmaking or scoring aspect of it. And Josh Green, I felt like he did a really good job in that first game against San Antonio. I thought he did a really good job of creating, whether it was off the screen. I thought that, he had that one bank three right before the third quarter ended.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, I think that was all or not skill, but like, I think that he meant to do that. Maybe not necessarily hit bank, but, it was definitely online. And, to his credit, he had a lot of shots like that in the preseason game against the Pistons, where he's kind of just screaming downhill and had like a pull-up three or a pull-up jumper, whatever it was. And I think he's definitely been working on that. I'm interested to see how that shot goes moving forward. But, also for the case for Tim Hardaway, you expected the Tim Hardaway moments, but he was also able to make a little bit too. I think he had a little dump off pass down low to Derek Lively. I can't remember if it was in the Brooklyn or the Spurs game, honestly.
He's in the Brooklyn game.
The Brooklyn game, yeah, he had that little dump off to Derek Lively where,
I was going to try to run with the narrative don't worry. I was going to try to run with the narrative in my article that Tim Hardaway Jr. is doing a little bit better as a playmaker. Cause I saw that play last night, the Brooklyn game, obviously. And I looked up the box score and he had one assist. So I was okay. That was the only one. That was the only one.
Yeah. I thought he had like 2 or 3 assists.
No, I know.
No, I mean, but still, like, just that ability to sort of draw the defense in, and whether it's
it'll open up passes for him.
Yeah, exactly.
He just it's forced to make, despite how bad his shot selection may be.
Hey, yeah, no, exactly. There you go. That's what the Mavericks needed. So, but yeah, to that point, I think it's going to be important for Josh Green, not only to develop, pretty much everything that we've been talking about, but also just from this season going on. He has that playmaking in him. And I think he maybe not necessarily carry, but I think he has the ability to be that second creator, say if Luka or, Kyrie Irving are out for whatever reason. I think that he has that ability to sort of fill in as best as possible. But yeah, I mean, I kind of want to touch up on Derek Lively's performance a little bit, because what was it, like 16 points, 10 rebounds. I think he had a block or 2 in there as well.
Yeah. 7 of 8 from the field.
Yeah, no, exactly. 87%. I don't know if you said that, or 9 of 8, or 8 of 9, whatever it was. Yeah, 87%. And I mean, for a debut, looking better than Wembanyama, it was absolutely incredible. It was electric. He had that dunk over what was it? Zach Collins. I don't know why I was blanking on that. He had that dunk over Zach Collins, multiple over Zach Collins actually. But the one where he put Zach Collins pretty much on his ass and had that, DeAndre Jordan-esque type dunk. I mean, we were like the 3 of like 30 Mavs fans that were in. No, honestly, there's a little bit more Mavs fans, but
Well, in our section,
in our section we were like 3 of 4
Yeah.
Mavs fans, and we were standing up, getting rowdy. It was
Yeah.
fun, and the Spurs fans did not like us at the end of the game,
No,
but
they did not.
it was wild. It was pretty fun, but his ability to roll. And not just roll, but like roll with intent. We haven't had that in a while. Dwight Powell, I think in the 21 season was honestly really good at doing that.
No, it was
But
the
last
best Dwight Powell version we've seen.
Exactly. Absolutely. I definitely
Yes.
agree with that. But last season, I mean, we saw maybe like 2 or 3 pick and rolls with him per game. And it was just not to the same effect that it was the previous year. I think having a guy that can, not just athletically get up, to touch the top of the backboard, but also, to have the ability to roll with intent and draw such a defensive like assignment. I don't know. Like Derek Lively is going to be massive for this team. I'm a little worried that, or I guess not worried because Jason Kidd, not that he had a good excuse for not using him down the stretch in the Brooklyn game, but it was a valid excuse. I can live with it. But yeah, I was a little worried by that. But outside of that, I thought that he played amazing in both games.
Well, it's a valid excuse if it's something that happens for one game, but we'll talk.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, that's why I'm not too mad yet.
Yes.
But yeah, I think he played a total of 30.5 minutes or 30 and a half minutes.
Yeah.
A Spurs game, and pretty much every second that he was on the, whether it was a dunk or some sort of defensive, not defensive, moment or whatever, but like he had his presence felt, and it was definitely electric. I think his ability to guard in the perimeter and guard in space has definitely been squashed. I know that was not necessarily one of his knacks or anything like that, but it was definitely a question mark in his game. And through 2 games, I can confirm in person. We both can confirm in person that is looking amazing. And that's why I don't really understand Jason Kidd's excuse of small ball 5, is because he looked really good in guarding in space. So we'll leave it there. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, specifically with that guarding on the perimeter stuff. I mean, you even look at the points where he had to guard Wembanyama one-on-one, because there were times that, he brought the ball up the court so fast, or they threw an outlet pass to him and Derek was just there, the only guy with comparable size. So he kind of just had to guard him out at the 3-point line, something he's really not even I guess, used to doing at all in his career. And, Wemby made some tough ass threes. I think it was a sort of reclamation thing for him after he got in foul trouble. And, he was trying to get that arena riled up by raining in threes, all 7'5" of him. I think if he had been a little bit more tactical in his approach, then he probably could have had some more points against the Mavericks. But nonetheless, the Mavericks, obviously, with the game planning and getting him in foul trouble and all that sort of stuff, they did an excellent job at, making, the main distraction of, what could potentially, derail their season opener, sort of by the wayside. But, even like what I was saying, Derek was there, contesting. He was in Wemby's eyes, his hands drenched all over his face, essentially, on some of those pull-up threes. And I mean, yeah, like they went in, but I mean, he has yet to, have a possession when I've seen him guard, even guards, wings, head up, on the perimeter, where it was just, a complete, monstrosity of a possession, and like everything just went wrong. There's been times he's got beat, sure, but I mean, he's either at least been like really close, or, to making a recovery block or something like that, or, they've, it's kind of just a tougher ish shot and he got a decent contest on it, but there haven't been just a lot of blatant mishaps from that perspective. So I definitely agree with you. We'll talk about that, but I mean, specifically in that San Antonio game, he just did a really good job staying light in his feet, being able to switch. I mean, he looked like an NBA starting caliber rim protector, better than a lot of guys that I've seen play thus far into the 2 games that we've seen this season, which is obviously saying a lot. I mean, I don't know if he'll continue to play at this rate, but I mean, it's a huge credit to his development and his work put in just the last couple months in summer league. I mean, I was there at summer league, and I've been there these past 2 games. It has been night and day difference between this guy's body. You can definitely tell maybe he just put on at least 10, 15 pounds of muscle, and on top of that, his screen setting ability, his just IQ, and like he's executing scram switches, at the beginning portion of the shot clock on defense to get the right matchup, stuff like that. I mean, just really being ahead of the game for a 19-year-old rookie, and not something that a lot of guys can do. And I mean, his frame size and athleticism speaks for itself. It's definitely NBA ready. Obviously, you'd like to see him add, he still needs to add more muscle. He's not completely there yet. It's not like, he's going to be the best rebounder every time he steps out there. There are going to be those moments. And, against the better NBA rim protectors, he's, still obviously, going to struggle to extent for the guys that just do better at, what he's doing. But there's just so much encouraging stuff. He's raining down threes today at practice. I know he kind of learned that corner three from his mom, Kathy Drisdale. So, when she played at Penn State back in the day, stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool story stuff. I know we've talked about his character and stuff, just his upbringing. So, take that all in tandem with, the on-court intangibles, and, the way that he played in that San Antonio game, with those putback dunks, I mean, everything. I mean, just big time, huge plays. I mean, all rookie team type stuff. If he's going to be producing at this club at this rate to be, starting caliber NBA center, averaging potentially a double his first year. I mean, that's what he showed he could do when given 30 minutes. So, that's kind of what I'm going off of here. So, but I mean, beyond that, obviously we just got to see a way bigger sample size of him going forward and see more, but, he has proven to me, at least through the first few games or the first 2 games rather, that he is the best easily, or obviously we know he's the best rim protector on the Dallas Mavericks, but, best center, best offensive center. He's starting to prove that as well. And at that point, there's just not a lot of excuses to not start him, to Jason Kidd's credit. But I mean, yeah, just his presence as a rim runner, as a screener, even more so, I thought as a rebounder and an enforcer in that San Antonio game compared to that Brooklyn game. I thought he shied away from that a little bit. But no, I mean, it was just all splendid. And I mean, there's, even it's like crazy because, we even look at the preseason and, he was making a lot more sort of rotational mistakes. There were a lot more times he was out of position in the preseason. I was questioning if he was going to be ready. I mean, talk about, an absolute, I wouldn't even say 180 from that, but maybe 90-degree turn because, he was already kind of going in the right direction. He's just been very impressive to me. And, that San Antonio game, one of the best memories definitely all have were, all 3 of us, getting really hyped, when he threw down that lob over Zach Collins. We couldn't quite tell if he, how much he threw it in at first and then kind of rattled in, so it wasn't as cool. But if he was able to get a clean throw in on that, man, we would have been going absurd. And then that, obviously the tripping, what was the putback dunk? Yes. And,
yes, yeah, no, that was wild. So, he came out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. That was wild.
The fact, and another thing before I head to you, Jaren, but he just stayed so poised. Despite how big the moment is, these are huge national TV games. I mean, that's not easy as a rookie to just, stay locked in during those moments. And, he's not like just, he's made his free throws. His shot form looks good. Obviously, he's missed a couple free throws, of course, but, he hasn't gotten to the point where they've had to hack him at the end of games or anything. I mean, it's just been really excellent across the board from him on all fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. I 1000% agree with what you just said. And, to your credit about him staying poised, I think that he's looked amazing. Not just from like on the court standpoint, but also, like you said, like just staying poised, staying connected within the moment. I think that he's looked extremely well in that department. And not just that, but, I think as you said, his free throw shooting, I think it looks really clean. I think his jumper, you can tell whenever it's a miss. You can tell or maybe not necessarily jumper because he hasn't really had that yet, but like his free throw, you can see whenever it's going to be a miss. You can see, or you can tell whenever it's going to be made just by, his release, his mechanics and stuff like that, which I think is a very good sign in terms of, his shooting going forward. I know
I mean,
like in
he has really
practice.
good follow through and shooting mechanics.
Yeah.
A lot of, because, a lot of 7-footers, they kind of just like almost like kind of push it up there because they're just so close to the basket. But he follows through fully. He does have a very good understanding of where, how to align his body. And that's not easy at those sort of dimensions.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that his mechanics have, looked really, really good. Granted through 2 games, but they've looked really solid. Really quickly, just because I feel like we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't talk about that Luka dagger at the end of the Spurs game. I want to say it was tied at 119, or it was 118 to 119 with like 2 minutes left in the game. The Mavericks held the Spurs scoreless in the final 2 minutes. I do know that. And not just that, but they looked really, really good whenever they did score. I believe it was, a corner three from both. Or I think Grant Williams was like in the 3-minute mark, but I know it was a corner three from Kyrie Irving, where he was able to just kind of, not flare out necessarily, but just kind of flow to the corner whenever Luka was driving. That looked really good. Luka was able to find him. And then, of course, nailed that corner three really confidently. And then I want to say it was, that breakaway or that, that breakaway layup that Kyrie Irving had, where I think it was him, Josh, and Luka were on the fast break, where he was able to find Kyrie for that wide open layup. And then, of course, Luka Doncic in Luka Doncic fashion closes out the game with a step back three at the top of the key. And I'm pretty sure it was pretty much nothing but net. And that's whenever the Spurs fans really started to hate us, because we got up out of our seats, looked behind us, and started waving bye-bye. As we should. I think it's
saying it
fair.
audibly.
Yeah, exactly. We were saying it audibly. I remember getting some mean mugging, or some people were mean mugging us. I mean, it's San Antonio. They're supposed to be our quote unquote big brother, so that felt good to do. But yeah, I think Luka's.
I think that where it's like, I think the conglomerate of Texas teams are all. I mean, just if we're looking at the historic pedigree, I guess. Well, no, that's a feeble argument. But if we're looking at the, I guess the 2000 onwards from that era, I'd say everybody's about equal.
Yeah, I would.
Well, no, from
from
2010 onwards.
Yeah, because I guess the Mavs have won one, the Spurs have won one, and the Rockets just kind of sucked, but they at least made it to the conference finals a few times. So
yeah, that was. Well, I mean, I was just more so talking, but from the success that the franchise have had the last couple of years. But no, I mean, definitely like the Spurs, throughout the early 2000s, obviously.
Yeah, they were running the table.
Run the table. But I mean, the Mavericks are right there with them. They just never seemingly crossed that, dynasty echelon where they were winning, every year, but there were still 50, 60 win games, dating back to, when Dirk really started coming into himself. But I mean, obviously way off topic. But no, I mean, I really like what you said, not just about like Luka closing out the game, but everybody in that San Antonio game, I thought, who was playing there at the end between that closing lineup of Josh Green, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Grant Williams, and Derek Lively II. I thought that they all, finished the game extremely decisively. Everybody was playing good there down the final stretch, and especially the defensive intensity, and how concentrated it was in those really important moments. I was really impressed by. And then obviously the shot making on the other end. I know Kyrie talked about a little about that post game, but Grant shot making there at the end, all that sort of stuff. That was really big. But transitioning into the Brooklyn game, Jaren, it was definitely there's definitely some parallels we can draw between the San Antonio and the Brooklyn game. I mean, obviously, like they're relatively like similar scores, but I do think that the defensive effort in that Brooklyn game may have been the best defensive effort between any of the halves the Mavericks have had this season, in my opinion. And in that second half, like we kind of referenced earlier in the podcast, it was just heliocentric Luka Doncic, go to work. But I think that there are a lot more things to take away from that Brooklyn game too, because in that San Antonio game, granted it is the first game of the season, guys have a lot of jitters and stuff like that. I'm not saying that we can take anything, definitive away from the Brooklyn game, but, we start to, just get more of a, feel for who this team is and, what the idealistic rotation, things of that nature, what that should be. And I think that the Brooklyn game, it definitely, had a lot of positives, kind of like I talked about in my post-game recap on the Smoking Cuban. But it also, across the board, like there were a lot of deficiencies that, maybe weren't present either in the San Antonio game or they were, and, they were also present in the Brooklyn game. So a lot of things to dive into with that. Obviously, starting the first quarter off, the Mavericks got off to a really hot start off the gate. Things were kind of seemingly clicking on all cylinders for them on offense, but Brooklyn was almost equally firing back. They were making some really tough shots in that first quarter. Mikal Bridges was making some contested threes, and I honestly thought that the Dallas defensive effort, like I alluded to, was really good in that first half. They went to matchup zone, I think, a few times. I can't say that for sure, but, looking from where we were at that almost press box angle, it did look like, they were putting a guy on the ball and, kind of playing almost like a, 2-3 for the rest of everybody, or 1-3 rather. And then, they were also just switching a lot, and, they had to match the small ball approach that Brooklyn took with Nicholas Claxton out ahead of the game. And, the Mavericks, I thought, honestly did a good job of inflicting their own play style on them in that first half, and not falling victim to the small ball lineup. Like I thought having Derek Lively out there, seeing how switchable he was, I thought that was going to be something that was going to, really, help Dallas start to take the game away in the second half, help them run away with things, because he was able to, be as switchable as we talked about. But on the other side of things, he was a pretty stout interior presence just because of his size alone, even if some of those wings, on the nets, like Ben Simmons, Dorian, Royce O'Neal, some of those bigger body guys, yeah, they definitely outmanned him for some rebounds a few times, which we'll obviously have to get better at. But, defensively, they were just having a rough time trying to get anything around him. And, I really kind of just like the dynamic that provided in the first half. And, like we had talked about with, that shot making in the first quarter, the Mavericks came out the gate hot. In that first half, I thought they did a better job of getting out in transition, stuff like that. And like the beginning of the third quarter too. Like I remember one play that comes to mind is when Kyrie had that tap pass in transition to Derrick Jones Jr. Off the, outlet pass, I believe, by Luka that I got tipped off or something like that. Like there were, the Mavericks were doing, I thought, a lot better job of, getting out on long misses, trying to push the ball, throughout the game, maybe compared to the San Antonio game. I thought they were getting into their sets just as fast, but it was a little bit, of an increased emphasis on playing fast, especially with how small that Brooklyn lineup was. But, I do think that the transition defense, despite the half court defense being good, I think that may have been a little bit under talked about in the first half. And I'm not going to say that it was something that I want to harp on too heavily, because it's at the end of the day, Spencer Dinwiddie is kind of like a, lower 30% career 3-point shooter. And, he obviously took a huge bump with playing in Dallas with Luka and stuff like that. And, he definitely, proved his worth even a little bit in Brooklyn as a shooter. But, I didn't know that, he's going to come out, firing like this season, even, with him being the primary creator on that team. And I mean, we'll see obviously going forward. I'm not taking anything away from one game, but he came back to Dallas on a vengeance arc. And, Jaren and I, and our friend that were there, we actually missed the pregame show for Dorian, the commemoration that the Mavericks put on. We found out that they did that later on Twitter, unfortunately. So it sucks. And, we'll get a little bit into Dorian and everybody else at the end of the podcast, obviously. Deeply appreciate his time in Dallas, and what he's, done, not just on the court, but everything for the city. Being here the last like 6 or 7 years has been huge. But they played the Dinwiddie Vengeance, or the Dinwiddie, not Vengeance, the Dinwiddie commemoration video as well. But they did it between the first and the second quarter. And after that, I believe in that second quarter, He was just pulling up on fast breaks, just chucking threes and just draining them. Got, hand in his face coming off a screen. Guy chases him over the screen. He's still shooting it. Made a couple like that. There were also some hoists that, turned out equally as bad for him and hit like the side of the rim, just like we saw in Dallas. But, he definitely had one of those more prolific shooting games. And that, his ability to push the ball is underrated. He did this in Dallas a lot too, he leads a lot of those fast breaks into transition threes, especially with the personnel that the Nets have. With Simmons wasn't trailing or somebody like that, they want to coming downhill. I mean, all those guys, all those 3-and-D wings, it's like, you might as well take 3 over 2. So he does a good job pushing the pace for them, getting those threes that they were firing up. The Nets were shooting a lot last night from, beyond the arc, especially with Claxton out, not having that role game really to go to. But other than that, I did think the defensive effort across the board in the first half was the best out of the 4 halves we've seen this season for the Mavericks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to cut off the flow of the podcast, but UNT just scored a touchdown to take the lead.
They actually
in comeback fashion.
I saw your face, so I knew that was probably the case. But
yeah.
Obviously, for those of you guys that don't know, Jaren and I go to UNT, and we did not go to the game just to do this podcast.
Yeah, just to do this podcast. Yeah,
like strictly almost because of that. Like, we had the luxury to go. It is a rainy day here in the DFW area, but UNT, after trailing, I believe 10 to 31,
31 to 10. Yeah.
31 to 10, could have been 7 to 31, is up on Memphis, who is not bad. They're 5-2 right now, and we're 3-4. We have some unfortunate losses under our belt, but as notable Mavericks broadcaster and UNT alum himself, Mark Followell, will tell you, he does some stuff for the UNT Gamecast, I think, as well. He'll tell you that, the Mean Green this year, they've bared some unfortunate losses, obviously, but it's not due to the talent. We got a new quarterback coming in after a couple of weeks. And he's really he's changed the offense up a little bit compared to that first week sort of abomination versus Cal. So if we win today, I know Jaren, of course, is 20 years old, not legally allowed to drink. I turned 21.
I'll be drinking Kool-Aid.
Jaren, he'll have some of the Dwight Powell special Kool-Aid that I
there we go.
So, we've had a great weekend of sports here in the DFW area. We didn't even obviously mention the Rangers winning game
series.
1.
Yeah,
we watched that after the Mavericks game. So, by chance, if Noah, if you're listening to this podcast, I apologize for not getting the article in last night, because that was essentially the main reason why. So, but Daddy's listening, so it's okay. Well, I got it in today, anyways.
There you go. You got it.
Only after Josh Paredes, our channel leader, sent a message to the Slack about everybody being timely on their articles and things of that nature. So
I actually didn't see that message.
No, and Noah made sure that I knew that message was in the Slack. So
yeah, I'm not. It's okay. It's okay. It happens.
I've been, we're getting things back into effect. We had a rough 2-day stretch of travel here between the Mainstream Mavs podcast, but what a great weekend of sports to celebrate. But let's get kind of back on topic, Jaren. Obviously I kind of just talked about the first half a little bit. What were your thoughts from the first half? And I talked pretty broadly. If you'd like to get into some of the more intricate details, the floor is yours.
Yeah, obviously you talked about a little bit of the schemes that the Nets were running, and not just that, but also how the Nets put up 59 points, but kind of had the Mavericks rather had a fairly good defensive half.
Yeah, you got really impressed. Hat off to Brooklyn for some of the shots.
No, absolutely. Yeah, they were making some really tough shots. Cam Thomas, Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian got going there. Royce O'Neal, he kind of finished off the game a little bit better than he started. But yeah, they started out the game really hot, making pretty much everything. I know that at some point they were 17 for 34 on 3-pointers, which left them at a whopping 50% at halftime. But yeah, they had the hot hand, and all respect to them, but they kind of lost it throughout the fourth quarter, and that's, I think, really why the Mavericks kind of took the lead. Also, Luka Doncic is Luka Doncic, that's why. But yeah, to kind of speak up on the defense a little bit, you could kind of tell whenever Ben Simmons was in the game in that first half, there wasn't much attention drawn, as there should be. Whenever he was on the perimeter, he was able to kind of not dictate the pace of the game necessarily, but he was able to run some offense through him. Whenever he got going downhill, I think he had 10 points or 8 points in this game.
Yeah,
10. 10, yeah. You know, his bulk of the scoring was whenever came downhill. There's really no stopping him. I mean, I forget how tall he is, but I know that he's a big dude. He's not a small dude. And having him coming down off hill or coming downhill, you know, is a big force to be reckoned with. And that's pretty much what happened to the Mavericks. And at some point, I knew that he was going on a streak. So outside of that, I really didn't see any defensive lapses in that first half. But I want to say it was it like 56-59 at half or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of wanted to piggyback off your point about Ben Simmons. Yeah, I thought that the Mavericks, obviously, you know, as any NBA team's going to do, you know, they're going to dare him to shoot, sag off him a little bit. But I almost thought at times that they underestimated
Yeah.
his driving capabilities, kind of to what you said, because, you know, there were a couple times that the Nets just did a really good job of running him off a curl off where they said
No
you
way.
know, like they said like no way. What happened?
Memphis scored a touchdown.
No. How many seconds left?
18.
What's the score?
44-42. It was about to be 45. I was a Hail Mary, bro. Like 36. They were on like the North Texas 36. So not quite Hail Mary, but like they chucked it up. So oh well.
Our defense is bad. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's at least we know with all DFW teams that trend applies, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
just joking. No, the Rangers got good defense.
No,
But
the
they could even
bullpen
have
touched
yeah,
up.
they did. They could even have better defense if fucking their starting pitchers just didn't get absolutely obliterated every single season. But you know, we can't complain because we're in the World Series. But
We are in the World Series. We're up
all
one.
right, is anybody else going to make the championship this year in the DFW area, Jaren?
If we're judging based off of the Spurs game alone, I think the Mavericks have a chance.
Oh,
Cowboys you can write off. The Spurs
judging
or
off of the
the
Spurs game alone.
no, not the
That's
Stars game or not Stars game, but the Stars. I know that they've looked really good. They're like 5-1-1. They just lost their first like in.
all right. Well, they're going to be the team that we officially delegate because
They have a chance.
yes, we can't let our fandom for the Mavericks and the Cowboys, but more specifically the Mavericks, override our unbiased predictions, of course. So
There we go. There we go.
yeah. But anyhow, you know, getting back to things, we apologize for the UNT delays. It is very emotionally encapsulating for us, especially at our young age. We just don't know how to take in that sort of influx of information. But it's okay. We're gonna mend things and go forward on the podcast. Jaren, you know, about Ben Simmons, you know, like I was saying, the Nets when they were able to get him in those curl off actions, get him going downhill, you know, when they'd set you know, like a down screen at the nail area. I thought he was really effective at being able to pass out of that to their corner shooters. Did a good job getting it to Dorian when he was coming downhill on the roll. You know, a lot of the time the Mavericks would bring help from the weak side, but because when he catches it off the curl off, you know, it's just like one dribble till he gets to the rim. So a lot of the time the low man doesn't, you know, have enough time to slide over and make an effective enough help. So, you know, that definitely was screwing the Mavericks over a little bit in that first half. Jacques Vaughn had some good play design on, you know, a lot of those actions where he had Simmons coming downhill to, you know, pass it out to the wing or the, you know, strong side corner, whatever it was. And, you know, obviously, as we transition into the second half, you know, Cam Thomas got it going and the Mavericks had a fairly tough time with that. And then the offense started to stagnate. We talked about it earlier, but I mean, Kyrie's process in both games, in terms of him getting to his spots, him making the appropriate reads, and, you know, him controlling the pace of play, being a leader on the court, you know, rebounding, you know, playing, you know, pesky defense, whatever it is, even on, you know, those smaller, you know, those bigger guys, where he's outsized. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job. He's been on all the right spots. You know, you really see his leadership and basketball IQ rubbing off a lot more with a full training camp with Dallas, I think, you know, compared to the last 20 or so games he played last year. You know, you can see that just, you know, 2 games in, just in terms of his camaraderie with the bench and, you know, the control that he sort of has with this group. But he obviously, you know, has bared a rough start to the season in terms of his shooting. And, you know, the Mavericks are struggling to find offense because, you know, they were looking to him as much as the Nets started to trap Luka at the point of attack to sort of create something. And things were just kind of going in and out, not hitting. I mean, he started to get going a little bit in that fourth quarter. but the Mavericks were having a tough time sort of finding offense out of that. And Tim Hardaway Jr. came in pretty big a few times. He only shot 6 for 17 and he shot 5 for 14 in the Spurs game. So, not the best numbers wise in both of these games, but he did a really good job, I think, specifically in the San Antonio or the Brooklyn game rather, of getting to his spots. And in the San Antonio game, I thought he was just a little bit more trigger happy. And the second, he even got a glimpse at a somewhat open three, he was chucking it, even if it was early shot clock. I just thought that he played a little bit more savvy of an offensive game, was trying to get to those in-between spots. He split I believe he split a double team one time and was able to pull for a little floater. Had a lot of good possessions just in terms of trying to work that in-between game, create some sort of offense that the Nets weren't trying to take away, because, they definitely made a point of emphasis, especially with that small ball lineup, to just, have a hectic sort of swarming approach to their defense, with those 3-and-D wings. They were just, they're trapping Luka at the point of attack and then just rotating really well to get out to those Mavericks shooters. And I think that the Mavericks started to bear some of the repercussions of that, not having guys that were able to get to the rim until Luka really started to take over, had a couple and ones, and then he just started bombing from three in that fourth quarter, as we saw there at the end, that we'll get into. But, outside of Tim, maybe Josh, 1 or 2 possessions, it was just kind of looking thin around the margins. And Jaden Hardy was listed as out in that Spurs game with the ankle. And I don't believe he ever showed up on the injury report. I looked before the podcast. I couldn't find anything of him being listed on every Mavs Nets injury report. So, and he was suited up. We can tell you that, that much. He was in pregame lines in the jumpsuit and everything, but he did not get any PT last night. They went with Seth Curry for a little stretch there in the second quarter. And he was able to get a nice little mid-range jump shot off of a little screen action, but the Mavericks seemingly really didn't play him much outside of that. Dante Exum got a couple minutes and he got like a transition dunk. That was one of the, he was doing a good job pushing the pace when he was in, but he did look a little wonky otherwise, but he literally only played a couple minutes. So I'm not going to really say much because there's not much to evaluate there. But yeah, like there just wasn't, with Kyrie being off, especially when the Mavericks did, opt to rest him and Luka, sort of at that end of third quarter stretch. That's where, really started to kind of get dry offensively for Dallas in that third quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like at times, in the Spurs game, we hadn't really seen defense or offense for that matter get stagnant. But I think in this Brooklyn game, and I also, you have to take it with a grain of salt. It's only the second game of the season, which I think is a large part of why this game kind of felt so stagnant at times. But I think it was, those minutes whenever Kyrie was sort of the only playmaker on the floor. Seth Curry was, of course, in there at some points, as you said. But, I think whenever Kyrie is the only playmaker, and this is not taking anything away from Kyrie, I just think it's beginning of the season, his shots just not falling. He's getting to his spots. He's getting the right shots. Things just aren't going down for him. And I think that's kind of why things looked a little stagnant in the process. Also, I want to say in that time span, Dwight Powell hit a three-pointer from the corner.
It was at the 6 minute 1 second mark of the fourth quarter.
Okay. So,
yeah,
I think Luka probably checked in by now.
He actually, it was before he started like going crazy though. It was before 14 points. Yeah.
I do know that. Yeah. I knew it was before he started going crazy, but, I think the process, as we kind of said, the process looked fine. It was just, nothing was really going through for either team at that point. I think the largest lead that the Nets had got out to was an 8 or 9 point game. And very quickly Dallas was able to mend that and come right back. But yeah, I think at times, and those sort of weird periods where, you're kind of staggering Luka's minutes and trying to keep Kyrie in the game just to keep things going. That's whenever we saw the stagnation. I don't know if that's necessarily a Jason Kidd thing where, not talking about like staggering minutes from that standpoint, but I don't know if it's a Jason Kidd thing where he just needs to get Kyrie the right lineup. That way things start to flow more fluidly. I'm not quite sure if it's, that problem. But, outside of that, I think it was just kind of a shots missing. I will say this, however, about the first two games. I think I think there has been a large gripe of people in that second game necessarily, where like they thought guys were playing bad. I don't think it's necessarily that. I don't think guys, maybe Tim Hardaway had a few too many bad shots, whatever it was. Grant Williams got played out in the final, few minutes of the game. I'm not quite sure if it's necessarily that. I think, a lot of it has to do on coaching. I think guys played fine. It's the second game of the season. You can't really expect too much. I think that, especially the same goes for coaching as well, but I think the rotations just need to get a little bit more pat. I know that's kind of, going off topic from what we were talking about.
It almost seems like they're trying to like find the rotation. Though,
yeah. Which is like, I will live with that if they're trying to find the rotation, but I think that they're trying to force certain narratives, certain things that aren't going to bear you well in the long run. And that's what I don't
because
like.
Because of pre-existing biases.
Yeah, pre-existing biases. You don't want to play Christian Wood in the fourth quarter. And we saw it one time against Oklahoma City, and look what happened. But I think, I think it's kind of a Jason Kidd thing. Not trying to take anything away from the win, but that could have been much more cleaned up. It could have been a lot better of a home opener in terms of winning and getting the job done. Really, but it required 49 points and a circus shot from Luka that I will say we had a great angle of, and I can confirm, or I think we can all confirm, even Luka confirmed it, that the shot looked good whenever it did go up and it banked off the glass perfectly. And the whole place erupted. So yeah, it was fun to watch, but yeah, I think it's just, kind of a rotational cleanup in terms of the game flow for, coaching and everything like that.
No, yeah, I think there's a lot to clean up from that perspective, but I mean, at the same time, like you said, we can't over evaluate given the just how much, limited film that we have to go off of, but we'll get into everybody individually before we end the podcast. And, probably a little bit less for, some of the more prominent guys that we've talked about, but we'll talk about, how everybody's done through 2 games and stuff like that. But, the rotations right now definitely are just very weird and confusing, as they have been, every season at the start, at least at the start, since Jason Kidd has been in Dallas. I hope that they do, prove to be more definitive. I don't think that the beginning of the season should just be treated as a trial period for you to figure everything out. Obviously to a certain extent, yes, you need a couple games or whatever to get things under your belt, but sooner or later, these games are really going to start to add up. And, that's what the preseason and training camp was for. I do know that the Mavericks obviously amassed over 17,000 miles on their preseason trip and, dealt with some injuries, things of that nature. But, things do need to get set in stone, relatively quickly here, at least within the next 10 to 15, within the first 10 to 15 games. And, if they're not by then, I think that's when we need to start having those discussions about, certain guys, needing to play more and, definitively, sort of stamping our approval on those takes, because, right now, I can maybe give Jason Kidd the benefit of the doubt that he's seeing something in practice that I'm just not seeing, when the tape's turned on. That could be the case, just because, first couple games, guys may have some jitters, you never know. But, as, I'd say 10, 15 games through, there needs to be a clear cut rotation. And I think any NBA team should at least have that. So that's something that we're going to definitely be looking forward to. But obviously, with the Luka heroics, I believe that, obviously the Mavericks, offense is stagnated to a premium there in that fourth quarter, but, the Mavericks were, also, on the other side of the ball, leaving the Nets shooters open a lot more. I think that the sort of toll of the amount of threes that the Nets were, hoisting all game, and, the matchup defense that was just heavily reliant on the Mavericks point of attack defenders being stout, being able to stay in front of, the likes of Cam Thomas, Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, stuff like that. I just think that the Mavericks didn't throw enough looks at those guys personally throughout the course of the game. I think had they got Exum in a little bit more, had they got, Jones Jr. in a little bit more, I know Josh played, I think 28 minutes in this game. I'm not even necessarily saying that those minutes should have gone down, but I think they just should have threw a little bit more, I think they should have rotated the wings a lot better, to your point, Jaren, because I think the guys that were on the floor at that point in the game, Grant Williams, who did play above 30 minutes, Josh Green, not from the standpoint that it was just too heavy of a dosage of minutes, but when they were in, they were seemingly the primary defender on, the in Williams' case, usually the best wing on the other team, or Green's case, the best guard, whether it was Dinwiddie or Cam Thomas, and obviously both Cam Thomas and Dinwiddie were having probably better games than they typically do, but still,
I don't know about Cam Thomas. That dude's averaging 32 as a starter. So,
32 games, but 32
even through last year. So,
no, I know his scoring numbers. Like I know them very well. Dude's a stud, but obviously, like I'm not taking anything away from his talent or potential, but he'll have to prove that he can be a long-term starter, obviously, before I start looking at him as an all-star type guy who's putting up those numbers consistently, even though, I'm definitely not blind to the fact that he is, a stat sheet stuffer from the perspective of every time that guy gets an opportunity to play more than 20 minutes, he's usually scoring above 20 points. But we'll see how he proves that on a long-term consistent basis if he is that guy for them, because he, at the end of the year last year, his defense was so bad that Jacque Vaughn wasn't even playing him in the rotation. But it definitely looked a little bit better last night. He looked really good. He's definitely had a little strength, so good for him. I thought he played probably the second best out of anybody on the court last night, outside of Luka. So he was hyper efficient, and in some of the games that I've watched him where he has gone off, that has not been the case. He's just been kind of shot chucking. Like he had a much more calculated approach to how he was playing last night and how he was, creating as the offensive initiator, which was really intriguing. If he, his big thing is opening up his playmaking, but even still, he played a hell of a game last night. But I thought that the Mavericks, point of attack defenders, to my point, like Green, even Grant Williams on the wing, I think they just got worn out to a certain extent by the end of the game, and they started to look a lot more lackadaisical in their closeouts. Guys just were preemptively reacting to footwork and certain moves, and getting faked out a lot easier towards the end of the game. There was at one point that Josh Green literally slid into the Nets bench because Royce O'Neal sidestepped him so hard on a pump fake three. And the Nets ended up making the Mavericks pay. They started getting back into a shooting groove after after having somewhat of a lesser offensive, productive third quarter. And, it seemed like all hope was lost until Luka Doncic, with 3 minutes and 22 seconds left in the game, just comes in Hail Mary Memphis Tigers mode and, makes 4 straight threes. I believe maybe, I don't want to say on 4 straight possessions, maybe within 5 or 6 possessions. I know Josh Green made some free throws in between there at the end of the game, and Luka had a pair of free throws as well, but he was the only Maverick source of offense. And it's like once that first one dropped, he just kept going for it. It wasn't like the Mavericks really ran anything else, and it was just crazy. It was, it gave as fans flashbacks to that Rockets game, his rookie season, where he made all those threes to close the game out, as his sort of NBA arrival moment. And, for him to finish off with a almost 49-point triple-double, and have that shot with 26.3 seconds left with the Mavericks tied 120 after hitting all those threes to keep them in the game amidst the Nets, starting to match the Mavericks tit for tat on all those threes, with them finding pockets on the perimeter. It was just a crazy performance. And, Tim Cato tweeted with a couple minutes left in the game that, Luka Doncic is going to have to will the Mavericks to an insane victory in this one. And he did just that. He made 4 straight threes in a row, all step backs, and one was literally double teamed, sidestep, at the shot clock to, basically be the go ahead game winning basket with 26.3 seconds left. What a start to the season for him specifically, even though the Mavericks are still figuring a lot of things out. He's planting his foot to win the 2023-2024 NBA MVP if he keeps playing like this. All right, guys. So unfortunately, we did have some Wi-Fi issues amidst the weather happening here in DFW, and Jaren was not able to finish out the remainder of the podcast, but luckily your boy is here. I got us. So I'm going to go ahead and finish it out for you guys. We obviously don't have too much more to talk about, as I we kind of just wrapped up that segment about, Luka's spectacular ending to the Mavericks 125-120 victory over the Brooklyn Nets. But there are still definitely some things that we can kind of talk about around the edges. I touched on Dorian, but I was really happy to see how, just much of a well-received, ovation he got at the arena and everything. And I was, extremely happy that he played well, did, really good in terms of, shooting throughout the last sort of stretch of the game there. And just some more stuff with the Nets. I know Dennis Smith Jr. also sort of made a return. He did not have the best game, unfortunately, but Jaren wore his jersey, so shout out to Jaren for that. We were at least somewhat showing our support. But just all of the Nets wings, like I said, from Lonnie Walker to Royce O'Neal, Mikal Bridges, Finney Smith, all of them, just played, great 3-and-D style basketball on both sides of the ball. And, we talked about that ad nauseum during the podcast, how that, sort of adversely affected the Mavericks throughout the game. But I just want to give a special shout out to them because, anytime I get to go to an NBA game in person, I always try to, watch the guys that I usually don't get a chance to watch, stuff like that. And I was really impressed by just the holistic shooting effort across the board from the Nets and just the way that their play style sort of was, because, without many initiators on that team, I was just impressed about, how, hell-bent they were at swinging the ball around the perimeter, trying to get those threes up. They do a good job at attacking certain points in the defense, just specifically on the perimeter, with their ball movement. So I did want to give another special shout out to them. But, obviously, if we're looking at this from the Mavericks perspective, with the rotations that we'd kind of talked about and, by Jason Kidd, there's obviously a lot of stuff to patch up early on. Nothing is completely set. And, I'd mentioned this during the podcast, but we will give him a little bit of grace for some of the sort of anomalies that are happening right now. But, it will come a point in time when these decisions are going to cost a lot more, not necessarily from, in the wins and loss column, because everything's equal right now, but, in terms of getting that, chemistry in that rotation, down pat to where, guys are most comfortable and thriving. That's obviously a huge thing at the beginning of the season. The Mavericks still, are working to do that. And, not any burning takeaways. This is not like my definitive statement, but based on the first two games, I think that, Dante Exum, Seth Curry, maybe even Hardy should get a little bit more minutes just to see a little bit of tertiary creation. I want to see the tempo push a little bit more. And on the rebounding front, the Mavericks, I believe, they lost the rebounding battle in the Nets game, and they did not lose in the Spurs game. Okay, well, they did a good job. I thought that kind of follows with what I was thinking. The Mavericks did a good job kind of collectively glassing out in that Spurs game. They did a good job of, just using their strength to derail Victor. And, Jaren talked about that with Grant, how he did, such a good job keeping him in front of him, so essentially almost, from that restricted area, not the restricted area, but from that dotted line area in the paint forward, he wasn't letting him, kind of get past there, no matter what sort of action San Antonio was trying to, run through him on offense, whether it was a face up or they're trying to run him off a down screen or whatever. And that was, really key. And, keeping him out of that area, I thought paid dividends for the Mavericks being able to stay, win the glass in that game. But, even against a team that only played a technical big in Day'Ron Sharpe for 3 minutes before he picked up, a couple fouls, if I believe, or something like that. And he had a couple wonky plays, and Jock Vaughn, pulled him pretty quickly there. I can't remember specifically what it was, but he did score real quick when he was in. But, the Nets essentially playing small ball all game. Obviously, they did a great job just collectively boxing out and getting to those longer misses like we talked about. And the Mavericks have got to do a better job of like patching stuff like that up, because, while the Mavericks may have had a huge height advantage, they did not have the strength, hustle, and effort advantage, right? And, a couple, guys that came in and did show that they had that last night, Dwight Powell, and we didn't really get to talk to him about much in that game, but I mean, he played phenomenal, defense when he got in. He didn't really play in the first game because of an illness. And we talked about how just atrocious his defense was over the preseason, but it was just a total 180 when he came in there today. He was heavily switchable. Jason Kidd had talked a little bit about in his media availability after the game how Dwight Powell historically guard Ben Simmons good. And, in theory, it does make sense given the body type that Powell is, being almost a bigger bodied wing in a center's body. I know he is 6'10", but he kind of does move like a wing, and he suffers from the same sort of deficiencies that they would if they were trying to protect the rim, that being his length and, some, I guess at this stage in his career, even his verticality. So, that's obviously a huge thing, but, he still is pretty quick footed for his size. Still, keeps his body in great shape, hustles really hard. And, against some of these bigger body wings, who aren't, too fast to where they're just going to cook him like, Cam Thomas was able to, a couple possessions, but, Powell can get down and, play some good defense. And he even was able to anchor down Mikal Bridges. There was one possession, slightly biased as this clip up on his Twitter, if you guys can find it. But Dwight, anchored down and, guarded multiple Nets defenders at the point of attack, switched on to, I believe, like 2 or 3 guys within a singular possession and locked all of them up to where they had to keep passing the ball around. It was just one of his better defensive games I've ever seen. I don't expect him to play, that prolific on a night-to-night basis, but, in terms of the whole rotation argument with Lively, I'm not going to be too hypercritical of it because of how, he played. I do think that Maxey offensively needs to really get it together because, him playing over Lively was a lot more of a head scratcher, because even if, you want to make the argument of, Powell's defense, being as good as it was last night and the Mavericks sticking with him, strictly from, them not wanting Derek to get played off the court due to, him having to guard the perimeter, which I thought he did a great job of, like we said. There were a couple possessions, yes, that he got beat off, by maybe Dinwiddie or Cam Thomas, but more often than not, he was able to anchor down on those guys. And, those are not easy guys to contain either, especially at his size. So I didn't think that there was a reason to pull him, especially, given the dividends that he pays offensively. But Dwight Powell hitting that corner 3 in the fourth quarter, I guess you really can't complain much. But going forward, that's going to be an interesting dynamic because, Lively is officially the starter now after the Mavericks, rolled out Kleber to, sort of test the air, I guess, in that first game versus Wembanyama, maybe not wanting to throw Lively the second right into the fire as we all thought they were going to. So that's going to be, one of the biggest dynamics to, watch, because Lively looked really good in his limited minutes last night. Looked like he could guard the perimeter, but, that confidence just wasn't instilled, in him from a coaching perspective. He didn't even register any personal fouls. It wasn't even a foul trouble thing. So that's obviously going to be huge to look at. Maxey, like I said, had a pretty underwhelming game from the perspective that, he just wasn't really looking for his shot. Didn't even shoot 1-3 in this game. Had a couple of openings, but just didn't look too aggressive. And, looked like he, looked decent from an interior sort of help side perspective on defense, being in the right place, rotating, using his body to deter, some of those smaller wings on the Nets. But, when he was matched up with guys one-on-one on the perimeter, did not look as good as his buddy Dwight, which usually isn't the case. But, we'll see how that kind of continues to operate. I really hope Derek Jones Jr. starts to get his shot coming along, because I think that will lead to more minutes. But otherwise, he's really good. He just hasn't really been involved in a lot of actions where the Mavericks have, got him cutting or going downhill. The Mavericks, I think, need to run a lot more of that sort of stuff. But, when Luka was operating at the hyper efficient clip that he was last night, you just let the guy keep shooting if he was doing what he was. But especially, at the rate, Kyrie wasn't, really hitting. But in that Spurs game, the Mavericks ran so many more off-ball actions just not to involve like their wings, with Jones Jr. and Josh and stuff like that. But to get like Kyrie involved with the Luka, direct screen actions, there just wasn't as much stuff like that. Last night was a lot more isolation based. I don't know if that's because, maybe Brooklyn's personnel being able to, pick passing lanes apart a lot harder maybe than the Spurs could. But, that's something I think that has got to improve, because even, as crazy as Luka Doncic's abilities to will this team to a victory like that are, they can't be relied upon on a night-to-night basis. And, Jason Kidd relied upon them, last night to win the game. But, that decision may, not always pay dividends, especially if Luka is not in the zone like he usually is, if the offense is stagnating elsewhere. So there's still plenty of things to wrap up. And, like Jaren said, these 2 days off are going to be integral for this team to, hopefully sort out the rotation a little bit better and get a little bit more of a clear understanding of where they're at and patch up some of these defensive holes. Cause, we've seen good and bad on both sides of the ball through 2 games, but, you can make every excuse in the book in terms of who we're playing compared to the other 4 2-0 teams. But I mean, we are 2-0 at the end of the day, so we'll take it. We can't, we got to enjoy these wins, man. They're fun, dude. Like, especially after last year, I had such a great time going to these games. I cannot overemphasize that enough. I had a complete blast seeing the Mavericks, go and perform. One other guy I guess we can touch up on before we end the podcast, and this is kind of off topic towards where I was going, but I just saw it come up. Grant Williams. I thought he did play a pretty good game. He had a couple, I guess, sort of dupes offensively where, he like missed a pass and, there were a couple threes I thought he should have probably made. But overall, I thought he played good defense. He's got a little bit of foul trouble. It kept him out of the game there late in the game. But, the lively rotation concerns are definitely a lot more prevalent, especially if he's going to actually play this good throughout. He hasn't shown signs of slowing down defensively and has looked just as good offensively. Maybe, his rebounding took a little bit of a hit, but we didn't get a good sample size of him in that second game. So those are going to obviously be huge going forward. And I'm excited to answer them. I want to see, if Hardy gets in, now that he's technically healthy, I believe, a lot of stuff, Dante Exum getting more minutes. We're going to have a lot of prevailing narratives sort of come to the forefront, but you can't complain too much when you're up 2-0. So those things will hit harder when we do lose games. And I'm sure that those storylines will prevail themselves more as they did last year. But, I definitely see the writing on the wall for some stuff to happen here. But, these practices are integral, especially at the beginning of the season, especially since I don't think the Mavericks really have their stuff together yet. And I don't think that they have a set rotation. I think the coaching staff is still kind of wanting to sift through these things, unfair or fair as that may be, if you think that they should have had that sorted out by now. Right. So that's going to be, increasingly interesting going forward, seeing how the shot distribution, the rotations, all that sort of stuff be so fun to cover going forward. And, I'm just glad we got off to a good start with this season and with the podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in as long as you have. If you listen to this whole episode, you are a real one. We really do appreciate you. Make sure to check out any of Jaren and I's content on thesmokingcuban.com. Like we said, make sure to get at our personal Twitters at WillMillJ, at Jaren Boslow. We post everything with the podcasts and our articles over there. We're also doing stuff with Pro Sports Fans PSF app where we're live streaming games. We couldn't game cast the games because we were obviously at the games the first 2 games. And but we're going to be doing live game cast during the games where you guys can come interact, watch the live stream while you're watching the game, while we're watching the game, get in the chat with us and talk to us on the live stream. Very multi-dimensional sort of platform that we're doing, and I'm doing it with Jaren and another partner that we have over at Pro Sports Fan, Grayson Gradkey. You can find his Twitter at Grayson Gradkey 25. And, we're going to be doing big things over there. And we have our first official game cast coming with the game on Monday because we're finally not going to a game. Not necessarily relief because they were really fun, but definitely relief from the content perspective, how much easier that will be because, I'm not on media row, so I can't just write during the game. I wish I could. I can, take notes and stuff on my phone, but only so much I can do. But stay tuned. We got a lot more stuff coming in. We're only going to be cranking it out more. And, thank you for listening to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. If you guys got this far in the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube. If you're going to make a comment down below, I'll give you guys a good comment to do since Jaren kind of knacked me for not giving you guys a good enough, prompt to comment down below. Comment down below. Who do you think is going to be the quote unquote Mavs all-star versus the Mavericks on, Monday versus Memphis? Because there always is one guy that, performs, vastly better than expectations in a game that, he usually wouldn't play. I know the Grizzlies obviously have some injuries and some guys out with, Jaw and Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. So that's why I bring that question up, see if Santi Aldama, John Concha, or one of those guys just goes off like they usually do against the Mavs. Or if you don't think there's going to be anybody, then don't comment nobody down below. The Mavericks will take the victory over decisively. I like that too. Just let me know. But yeah, otherwise, make sure if you're on another listening platform, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcasts, get at us on those. Give us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate it if you guys turn on post notifications, all that sort of stuff to support our show. It means a lot. And if you guys do actually listen to our show or frequent our show, it'll help you stay in the loop with what we got going on in terms of our feed and stuff, as well as our Twitter, Mainstream Mavs Podcast Twitter at Mainstream214. As you guys can see, my voice is going away. I've been shouting a lot the last 2 days of games, but it was all worth it. And I'm happy I got to hop on the podcast and get this content out to you guys. Y'all have a blessed Saturday night if you see this then, or Sunday if you're watching it then, or even Monday if you're watching it ahead of the game. But other than that, this has been Will with the Mainstream Mavs podcast, and we will catch you guys in the next one after Monday night. Peace out.